The woman's face went ghost white when she saw me across the conference room. Her father was mid-sentence, saying something about glorified security guards, but she'd stopped breathing. Her hand found the edge of the table like she needed to steady herself. "Callahan," she whispered. "Let me back up." The invitation came 3 weeks after I'd buried my discharge papers in the bottom drawer of my apartment. "Sara, your father's launching a new venture. Partnership celebration Friday at the Harborview Club. He'd like you there." My stepmother Linda's voice carried that particular strain of obligation dressed as warmth. Dad hadn't called himself. Hadn't called since I'd come home from Germany, walking with a cane, officially retired at 38. "I'll be there," I said, because what else do you say? I chose charcoal slacks and a cream blouse, professional but unremarkable. The cane was still necessary some days. The left knee hadn't healed right after the surgery, but I'd practiced walking without it for short distances. Pride, maybe. Or just habit from years of not wanting to show weakness. The Harborview Club smelled like old money and older privilege. Leather and wood polish and expensive scotch. Dad's world. The one I'd never quite fit into even before I'd enlisted at 21. He was holding court near the windows, silver-haired and confident, surrounded by men in tailored suits. His new business partner, Richard Brennan, stood beside him, tall, red-faced, the kind of man who talked loud to prove he belonged in the conversation. "Sara." Dad's smile was automatic, didn't reach his eyes. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it. This is Richard Brennan. Richard, my daughter Sara. She recently separated from the Navy." The pause before separated was deliberate. Not retired with honor. Not medically discharged after 17 years of exemplary service. Just separated, like I'd quit a job at a bank. "Navy, huh?" Brennan's handshake was crushing, performative. "What did you do, personnel?" "Supply chain." "Intelligence," I said. "Oh." The interest in his eyes died instantly. "Desk work. Important stuff?" "I'm sure." The dismissal was complete. He turned back to Dad. "As I was saying, the logistics contracts alone should net us." I found a seat near the bar. The room filled with Dad's associates, investment bankers, real estate developers, a few politicians. Linda worked the crowd with practiced ease, her hand occasionally touching Dad's arm, reminding everyone she was the current wife, not the dead first one. Brennan's voice carried. He was telling a story about his time as an Army reservist 20 years ago. Some training exercise where he'd played leadership games for 2 weeks and earned a certificate. "Real military service," he announced, "is about discipline, structure, making hard decisions in the field." His eyes found me across the room. Not sitting in some air-conditioned office analyzing data while the real warriors do the work. A few people glanced at me. Dad's face was carefully neutral. "Richard's daughter is joining us tonight," Linda said brightly, clearly trying to redirect. "She's just finished her master's in international relations. Very accomplished. She's brilliant," Brennan said with obvious pride. "Unlike some people's children, she took her education seriously. Didn't run off to play sailor." The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Then someone laughed nervously, and the conversation shifted. I excused myself to the bathroom. The face in the mirror was older than I felt. Lines around the eyes. A scar at the hairline from where shrapnel had traced across my scalp in Mosul. I'd been pulled from the wreckage of a vehicle that had taken an RPG. 3 broken ribs, the shattered knee, minor traumatic brain injury. The fact that I'd kept transmitting intelligence for another 20 minutes before losing consciousness was in my classified service record. My call sign had been Reaper. Not because I killed. Intelligence officers didn't kick doors or pull triggers. But because I found people. Terrorists. Hostage takers. High-value targets who thought they were ghosts. I found them, and then other people made them stop breathing. When I returned, a woman about my age was standing with Brennan. She had his height, his coloring, but her eyes were different, intelligent, careful. This was the accomplished daughter. "Everyone, my daughter Caroline," Brennan announced. PhD. Candidate at Georgetown, specializing in counterterrorism and hostage negotiation. Caroline smiled politely at the room. Then her eyes landed on me. She froze. I saw the recognition hit her like voltage, the sudden rigidity, the sharp intake of breath. Her hand went unconsciously to her left wrist, where I knew, beneath her sleeve, there would be a scar. A zip-tie scar. I'd seen it in the photographs, the ones taken after the rescue. "Caroline." Brennan noticed her distraction. "You all right?" She was staring at me. I gave the smallest shake of my head. Not here. Not now. But I could see her calculating, remembering. She'd been 23, a graduate student doing research in Syria when her group had been taken. ISIS affiliate, small cell, opportunistic kidnapping. 6 hostages total. They'd held her for 11 days. I'd found her in 9. I'm fine, Caroline said, but her voice was unsteady. I think I need some air. Caroline excused herself to the balcony. Through the glass, I could see her gripping the railing, her shoulders rising and falling with controlled breaths. No one else seemed to notice. Brennan was already back to his war stories, something about obstacle courses and marksmanship. I gave her 5 minutes, then followed. The evening air was cold off the harbor. Caroline didn't turn when I stepped outside, but she spoke immediately. Callahan, she said. Your call sign was Callahan. Or no, not your call sign. Your name. What they called you. She turned now, and her eyes were wet. You were in the operations center. When they brought us out, you were the one who. Her voice broke. You should go back inside, I said quietly. I saw you for maybe 10 seconds. They hustled us past, wrapped in those thermal blankets. But I heard the SEAL team leader talking to you. He called you Reaper. He said you'd pinpointed the location from a 3-second phone call. 3 seconds of background noise. She was crying now. How did you? I never got to ask. They kept us separated for debriefing, and then everything was classified, and I didn't even know your real name. It's better that way. Better. She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. You saved my life. You saved 6 lives. Do you know what they were planning to do to us? The video they were going to make. She wiped her eyes fiercely. I went back to school because of you. Because I wanted to understand how rescue operations work. How intelligence works. I wanted to be part of the solution. Inside, through the glass, I could see Brennan gesturing broadly, entertaining his audience. Your father doesn't know? I said. No. He knows I was kidnapped. He had to know that much. But I told him it was a random thing. Resolved quickly, no big deal. He's not good with vulnerability. She steadied herself. He thinks my PhD is theoretical. Academic. He doesn't know I consult with State Department now. Hostage recovery policy. Why didn't you tell him? Same reason you don't correct him when he dismisses your service, I imagine. She looked at me directly. Because men like our fathers need the world to be simple. Need heroism to look a certain way. We stood in silence for a moment. Harbor lights reflected off the water below. That mission, Caroline said finally. How did you do it? Everyone said it was impossible. 11 days, and they'd moved us 4 times. Pattern recognition, I said. Your captors were using stolen phones, rotating them, but they had habits. Times of day, they felt safer making calls. One of them called his mother. We've flagged her number months earlier from a different operation. He talked for 3 seconds before someone shut him down. But those 3 seconds had ambient noise. Traffic patterns. A specific vehicle horn that's common in one district of Raqqa. We cross-referenced with drone footage, SIGINT, human intelligence from assets on the ground. Narrowed it to 6 possible buildings. Then to 1. In 9 days. We had a good team. You had a brilliant team leader. She smiled slightly. That's what the SEAL said. He said he'd worked with a lot of intelligence officers, but you were different. You didn't sleep. Didn't leave the operations center except to brief command. You built this web of information that seemed impossible. It was my job. It was more than that. She turned back to the harbor. After they pulled us out, after the debriefing and the psych evals and the flights home, I had nightmares for months. Still do sometimes. But the one thing that helped was knowing someone like you existed. Someone who gave enough of a damn to find us. The door opened behind us. Brennan's voice boomed out. Caroline, there you are? Come inside. I want you to meet Senator Morrison. She looked at me, a question in her eyes. I shook my head fractionally. Your choice. Coming, Dad. She started toward the door, then paused. Lieutenant Commander Reaper. That was your rank, wasn't it? I looked it up later. Studied the organizational structure. Just Sara now? I said. No, she said firmly. Not just Sara. Never just Sara. Inside, Brennan had gathered a larger crowd. He was holding court about military service, about sacrifice, about the difference between real operators and support personnel. People don't understand, he was saying as we entered. The guys on the ground, the ones taking fire, those are your real heroes. Not the bureaucrats back at headquarters, shuffling papers. Dad was nodding along. Linda was refilling drinks. No one challenged it. My daughter understands real risk, Brennan continued. She was in Syria doing her research when that whole ISIS mess was happening. Dangerous stuff. But she was smart. She got out before things got really bad. Caroline's jaw tightened. I saw the decision crystallize on her face. Actually, Dad, she said clearly, her voice cutting through the room. I didn't get out. I was taken. The room went silent. Brennan's face darkened. Caroline, we agreed not to. I was kidnapped by an ISIS affiliate. Held for 11 days. 6 of us total, 2 other students, a journalist, an aid worker, a translator. Her voice was steady now, controlled. They were planning to execute us. Make an example. Caroline, Brennan said tightly. I'm alive because of a Naval Intelligence officer who tracked us down from essentially nothing. A 3-second phone call. Background noise. This officer built an intelligence picture so precise that a SEAL team was able to infiltrate, neutralize the captors, and extract all 6 of us with 0 hostage casualties. People were staring now. Dad's face had gone carefully blank. Caroline turned to me. Commander Sara Callahan. Call sign. Reaper. The best targeting officer in Special Operations Command, according to the SEAL team leader who pulled me out of that building. Brennan looked like he'd been slapped. His face went from red to purple. That's... Caroline, you said it was a minor incident. You said, I lied to protect you from worry. And because I knew you'd minimize it somehow. Make it about my choices instead of about the people who saved me. She looked at him steadily. But I'm not protecting you anymore. Not when you're standing here insulting one of the people who gave me my life back. The room was frozen. Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Commander, Senator Morrison spoke up from near the bar. He was older, 70s, with the bearing of someone who'd actually served. Would that be the Racker extraction, 2016? 6 hostages, 11-day operation. Senator, I can't discuss. Of course. Classified. He nodded slowly. But I was on the Armed Services Committee then. We got briefed. I remember because the intelligence work was so precise that the SEAL team commander said it was the cleanest hostage rescue he'd been part of in 20 years. He looked at Brennan. Your daughter was one of those hostages? Caroline nodded. Morrison crossed the room and extended his hand to me. Commander, it's an honor. We read the after-action reports. The work your team did was extraordinary. Thank you, Senator. Brennan was struggling to process. You were part of Special Operations? She led the intelligence cell, Caroline said. 17 years with Naval Intelligence, 14 of those attached to Special Operations Task Forces. She found terrorists, hostage takers, high-value targets. The people no one else could find. But she never said. Brennan looked at Dad accusingly. You never mentioned. Because I didn't know. Dad's voice was quiet, almost wounded. Sara, why didn't you tell me? The question hummed there. The same question he'd never asked in 17 years. Why didn't you tell me? As if the burden had been mine to force him to care. I tried, Dad. I kept my voice level. When I made lieutenant, I called you. You said you were busy with a merger and we'd celebrate later. When I got promoted to lieutenant commander, I emailed you my new rank. You wrote back, congratulations on your promotion, with no follow-up questions. When I was injured in Mosul, 3 broken ribs, shattered knee, traumatic brain injury from an RPG attack, I was at Walter Reed for 3 months. You visited twice. Both times you spent more time checking your phone than asking how I was healing. Linda's face had gone pale. Around the room, people were carefully studying their drinks. Every time I came home, I continued, you introduced me as my daughter who was in the Navy, past tense, like it was a phase I'd outgrown. You asked about benefits and retirement plans. You never asked what I actually did. And when I tried to explain, the parts one could explain, you changed the subject or make a comment about everyone serves in their own way. I thought. Dad stopped, started again. You were so quiet about it. You deflected when I asked. I was quiet because my work was classified. Because discussing it could endanger operations, endanger assets, endanger the people I worked with. I was quiet because in my world, silence was part of the job. I paused. But silence doesn't mean there was nothing to say. Caroline stepped beside me, a gesture of solidarity. Commander Callahan spent 11 days, probably more like 9 days and 16 hours, knowing how these operations work, building an intelligence picture from almost nothing. She coordinated signals intelligence, human intelligence, drone surveillance, and pattern analysis. She narrowed our location from an entire region to a single building. When the SEALs went in, they knew exactly how many captors there were, exactly where we were being held, exactly what the threat profile looked like. She saved my life, Caroline said, looking at her father. And you spent this entire evening dismissing her service as desk work, while glorifying your 2-week reserve training from 1995. Brennan opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. Morrison was still standing near me. Commander, I apologize if this is inappropriate, but did you work with Task Force 714? The counterterrorism operations in Iraq and Syria? Senator, I really can't. I understand. He looked around the room. Folks, I can't discuss classified operations. But I can tell you that the intelligence work being done by officers like Commander Callahan was some of the most sophisticated, dangerous, and critical work in the entire war on terror. These weren't people sitting in safe offices. They were embedded with special operations teams, often in forward positions, often under fire. He looked at Brennan, and they were absolutely essential. The operators couldn't do their jobs without them. Dad crossed the room slowly. Up close, I could see he'd aged since I'd last really looked at him. More gray, more lines, more weight in his shoulders. I'm sorry, he said. Sara, I'm so sorry. I was so focused on building the business, on proving myself after your mother died. I needed you to fit into a simple category. Safe, uncomplicated. And when you didn't, when you kept choosing this life, I didn't understand. He stopped, his voice breaking. I failed you. Yes, I said. You did. He nodded, accepting it. Is there a way to start over? I don't know if we can start over. But maybe we can start from here. I'd like to know about your service. All of it. The parts you can tell me. It'll take time. I have time. He glanced at Linda, at the party. Or I'll make time. Real time, not the scraps I'd been giving you. Brennan approached, and I could see the calculation in his eyes, the social embarrassment, the business partnership, the need to smooth things over. Commander Callahan, he said stiffly, I apologize for my comments. If I'd known. If you'd known, you'd have what? Respected me? Valued my service? I kept my voice even. The problem, Mr. Brennan, isn't that you didn't know my resume. It's that you assumed military service is only valuable when it looks a certain way, when it fits your narrative of what heroism is supposed to look like. He had the grace to look ashamed. Caroline touched my arm. Would you have coffee with me sometime? I'd like to hear more about what you do now. And I'd like to tell you what came after, for me. How the work you did rippled outward. I'd like that, I said. The party continued, but it was different now. People approached me with respect, with questions, with genuine interest. Dad stayed close, listening, finally paying attention to this part of my life he'd ignored for so long. As the evening wound down, Caroline and I stood on the balcony again. The harbor was dark now, lights reflecting on water. I meant what I said, she told me, about wanting to be part of the solution. I'm consulting with state now. Hostage policy, recovery operations, family support. I'm trying to make sure the next person who gets taken has someone like you looking for them. That's good work, I said. I learned from the best. She smiled. Even if I only met her for 10 seconds in a thermal blanket. We stood in comfortable silence, two women whose lives had intersected in darkness and violence, now finding each other again in peace. Inside, through the glass, I could see Dad talking to Senator Morrison. He was asking questions, his posture engaged in a way I hadn't seen directed at my life in years. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't resolution. But it was something. A beginning, maybe. A recognition that the daughter he'd dismissed had spent 17 years doing work that mattered, in shadows he'd never see, for people she'd never meet. And for Caroline, who I had met, for those 6 hostages who'd gone home to their families, it had been enough. Thank you, Caroline said softly. I never got to say it properly. Thank you for finding me. You're welcome, I said. And thank you for seeing me tonight. For speaking up. Always, she said. We went back inside together, leaving the darkness behind. End.